The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's NICU hummed softly as Sarah, Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cool glass window, watching the tiny incubators lined up like fragile promises. Her own daughter, Emma, had graduated from this very unit 3 months ago, a premature fighter who'd spent her first 6 weeks clinging to life behind plastic walls. Now Sarah stood here for an entirely different reason, carrying cooler bags filled with liquid gold that her body continued to produce in abundance. She'd never planned to become a milk donor. The idea hadn't even crossed her mind during those terrifying early days when Emma arrived 10 weeks too soon, weighing barely 3 pounds, but her body had other plans, producing enough milk to feed triplets when she only had one hungry mouth to nourish. The lactation consultant had mentioned donation almost casually, and something in Sarah had immediately said yes. If she could help another mother, another baby fighting the same battle Emma had won, how could she refuse? The NICU coordinator, a warm woman named Patricia with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, greeted Sarah at the secured entrance. They'd developed a comfortable rhythm over the past month. Sarah would drop off her carefully labeled bags of frozen milk twice a week. Patricia would log everything meticulously, and occasionally they'd chat about Emma's progress or the anonymous babies who were receiving Sarah's gift. "You're a blessing," Patricia always said, and Sarah would brush it off with an embarrassed smile, insisting she was just doing what felt right. But today Patricia's expression was different, troubled, almost hesitant. "Sarah, could we talk for a moment?" In private, Patricia gestured toward a small consultation room away from the bustling hallway. Sarah's heart lurched. Had something gone wrong with her milk? Was there a contamination issue? She followed Patricia into the quiet room, clutching her cooler bag like a shield. Patricia sat down across from her, folding her hands on the table. "Everything is fine with your donations. In fact, that's part of what I need to discuss with you. You've been incredibly generous, and your milk has been feeding several babies in our unit." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "One baby in particular has been receiving your milk almost exclusively for the past 3 weeks. His name is Owen. He was born at 26 weeks, and he's had a difficult journey." Sarah's chest tightened with a familiar ache. She knew that journey. She'd lived it. Owen's mother, Rachel, hasn't been able to produce enough milk despite trying everything. The stress, the trauma of the early delivery, her own health complications, it's all worked against her. Your donations have been sustaining him. Patricia's eyes met Sarah's directly. But something unusual has happened. Owen has been struggling with feeding, refusing formula, having difficulty with the donated milk from other mothers. But your milk, he takes it eagerly, gains weight on it, thrives on it. It's like his body recognizes it somehow. Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "That's not scientifically possible." "No, it's not," Patricia agreed. "But I've been doing this for 23 years, and I've seen things I can't explain. The body has its own wisdom sometimes. The point is, Owen's parents, Rachel and her husband Daniel, they'd like to meet you. If you're comfortable with that. They want to thank you personally, and they're hoping to establish a more direct arrangement for milk donation. Owen's doing so well on your milk that they're afraid to disrupt what's working." The room felt too small suddenly. Sarah had deliberately kept her donation anonymous, not because she didn't care about the babies, but because she'd worried about getting too emotionally involved. She'd already been through the ringer with Emma. She'd already spent weeks barely sleeping, watching monitors, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. Could she handle connecting with another mother's pain? But even as the fear rose up, another feeling pushed through it. The memory of those dark early days, when strangers had helped her, the NICU nurses who'd held Emma when Sarah was too exhausted to stand, the other mothers who'd shared their stories in whispered conversations during midnight, pumping sessions, the donated milk that had supplemented Emma's feeding when Sarah's supply was struggling to come in. She'd been held by a community of people who understood, and now she had the chance to be that person for someone else. "Okay," Sarah heard herself say. "I'll meet them." 2 days later, Sarah returned to the NICU with another cooler bag. But this time, Patricia guided her deeper into the unit, past the larger rooms where stronger babies were preparing to go home, into the intensive section where the most fragile infants fought their battles. Rachel and Daniel stood beside an incubator labeled Owen Mitchell, and Sarah's breath caught at the shared last name, a coincidence that felt like something more. Rachel turned first, and Sarah saw herself reflected back, the dark circles under the eyes, the protective hunch of the shoulders, the desperate hope mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. Rachel was younger than Sarah, maybe mid-20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun and a nursing tank top stained with formula and tears. "Sarah?" Rachel's voice cracked. "I'm Rachel. This is Daniel." Daniel was tall, with carpenter's hands and a gentle face creased with worry. He extended his hand, and when Sarah shook it, she felt his grip tremble slightly. "I don't even know how to thank you," Rachel began, tears already streaming down her face. "Owen is our first baby. We had no idea anything was wrong until I went into labor at work. One minute I was filing reports. The next minute my water broke and there was blood everywhere. They airlifted me to this hospital and Owen was born 4 hours later. He was so small, Sarah, 13 ounces. He fit in Daniel's palm." Sarah looked into the incubator where a tiny boy, still impossibly small but clearly bigger than 13 ounces now, slept beneath warming lights. His chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm that all NICU parents learned to watch obsessively. He wore a diaper that looked like a doll's clothing, and his little face was peaceful in sleep. "He's beautiful," Sarah whispered, and she meant it. Every NICU baby was beautiful to her now, every single fighter. "He couldn't eat at first," Daniel continued, his voice rough with emotion. "They had him on TPN, just nutrients through an IV. When they finally got him stable enough to try milk, my body just wouldn't cooperate. I tried everything, the pumping, the medications, the supplements, the teas that taste like grass clippings. I could barely produce an ounce a day. I felt like such a failure." "You're not a failure," Sarah said immediately, fiercely, recognizing the self-blame she'd carried herself. "Your body went through trauma. You're doing everything you can for your son." Rachel's face crumpled. The donor milk from the milk bank helped at first, but then Owen started having issues. Digestive problems, feeding aversions, weight loss. The doctors tried different formulas, different donor sources. Nothing was working consistently, and then Patricia suggested your milk specifically because the composition was similar to what we'd been using before, and it was like a switch flipped. He took to it immediately. He started gaining weight, becoming more alert, reaching his milestones. "The doctors can't explain it, but we don't need an explanation. We just need you." The weight of those words settled over Sarah. They needed her. This family, these strangers, needed something only she could give. It was terrifying and overwhelming and somehow exactly right. "I'll keep donating," Sarah said. "As long as my body produces milk, Owen can have it." Over the following weeks, Sarah's life developed a new rhythm. She'd wake with Emma, feed her, pump for Owen, take Emma to daycare, work her shift at the insurance company, pump again during lunch in the tiny bathroom with the broken lock, pick up Emma, come home, feed Emma, pump for Owen, deliver the milk to the hospital twice a week, fall into bed exhausted, and begin again. It was relentless, but somehow it filled a space in her heart she hadn't known was empty. She started timing her milk deliveries with Rachel's visits to the NICU, and gradually, carefully, a friendship began to form. They'd sit in the family room while Owen slept, drinking terrible hospital coffee and sharing their stories. Rachel talked about the guilt of going into labor early, even though the doctors insisted it wasn't her fault. Sarah talked about Emma's father, who'd left during the pregnancy, when he'd decided fatherhood was too much responsibility. They cried together, laughed together, and built something fragile and precious in that sterile hospital environment. Daniel would sometimes join them after work, his clothes dusty from construction sites, and he'd talk about the nursery he was building at home despite not knowing when. Owen would be strong enough to use it. He needed to build something, to create rather than just wait and worry. Sarah understood that too, the need to take action in a situation where so much was beyond control. Emma came with Sarah one evening, now 6 months old and thriving, a chunky, happy baby who'd overcome her rough start. Rachel held her with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "This is what Owen will be like," Sarah said softly. "You'll get through this. He'll come home and you'll worry about different things. Normal things like sleep schedules and teething. Promise?" Rachel whispered. "I promise." It was a promise Sarah had no right to make. But she made it anyway because Rachel needed to hear it, and because Sarah believed it with everything in her. As Owen grew stronger, the nurses started preparing Rachel for his eventual homecoming. He was up to 4 pounds now, breathing on his own, taking bottles consistently. But there was a problem. He would only take bottles if they contained Sarah's milk. Any attempt to introduce formula or transition him to Rachel's minimal production resulted in refusal, screaming, and stress that set back his progress. The doctors were baffled. Babies had preferences, certainly. But this was something more intense, almost as if Owen's body had imprinted on Sarah's milk the way Some infants imprint on their mother's breast. "What are we going to do when he comes home?" Rachel asked Sarah during one visit, her voice tight with anxiety. "I can't ask you to keep doing this forever. You have your own daughter, your own life. But Owen won't eat without your milk. The doctors say he'll eventually adjust, but what if he doesn't? What if bringing him home means he stops eating and we have to come back?" Sarah had been thinking about this exact question, lying awake at night while Emma slept peacefully in her crib. Her milk supply was still abundant, showing no signs of decreasing even as Emma started eating solid foods. She could keep pumping for Owen indefinitely. But was that healthy for anyone involved? What happened when her milk eventually dried up? What happened when Emma got older and needed more of Sarah's time and attention? What happened if Sarah wanted to date again? Maybe build a life with someone who might not understand this unusual arrangement? But every time she thought about stopping, she'd remember Owen's tiny face, the way he'd grab the bottle with his miniature hands, the peaceful satisfaction in his expression after feeding. She'd remember Rachel's gratitude and Daniel's quiet relief. She'd remember being the person who'd received help when she'd needed it most. "Let's take it one day at a time," Sarah finally said, the only answer she had. "Let's get Owen home first, then we'll figure out the rest." Owen came home on a Wednesday afternoon in late autumn, nearly 4 months after his birth and still a month before his original due date. Sarah and Emma came to the hospital to see them off, and Rachel hugged Sarah so tightly that Emma, squeezed between them, let out an indignant squawk that made everyone laugh through their tears. "Thank you," Rachel whispered into Sarah's hair. "Thank you for giving us our son." But the story didn't end there. Owen's dependence on Sarah's milk continued at home, and Sarah found herself not just donating milk but becoming increasingly woven into the family's life. Rachel called her in a panic the first night home when Owen wouldn't settle, and Sarah talked her through the same techniques that had worked with Emma. Daniel texted her photos of Owen reaching new milestones, his first real smile, the first time he grabbed his feet, the afternoon he rolled over. She started bringing Emma over for playdates, the two babies lying on a blanket together, while Sarah and Rachel drank tea and talked about everything and nothing. Sarah's mother, who'd been wary of the arrangement at first, came to visit and found Sarah's freezer full of carefully labeled milk bags for Owen, her dining room table covered in pump parts drying on a rack, her phone lighting up with messages from Rachel about feeding schedules. "Honey, this is a lot," her mother said carefully. "I'm proud of you for helping, but are you sure you're not taking on more than you can handle? You're essentially feeding 2 babies, working full-time and parenting alone." "I know it looks crazy," Sarah admitted, washing pump parts in the sink while Emma played with blocks on the floor. "But Mom, I can do this. My body is capable of this. And that little boy, he needs me in a way that's hard to explain. It's not logical or convenient, but it's real." "What happens when they don't need you anymore?" her mother asked gently. Sarah had been avoiding that question, but it hung in the air now, demanding acknowledgement. "I don't know. But right now they do need me, and I need them too in a way. They make me feel like the hard parts of Emma's birth meant something beyond just our story. Like maybe it all happened so I could be here for Owen." Winter came, and Owen continued to thrive. He was gaining weight beautifully, meeting his adjusted milestones, and developing a personality, serious and watchful, with a sudden brilliant smile that reminded Sarah of Emma's. But he still refused anything but Sarah's milk. And as he grew bigger and hungrier, Sarah found herself pumping 6 times a day to keep up with his needs, plus Emma's decreasing but still present breastfeeding sessions. She was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of being needed by too many people, of having her body belong more to others than to herself. She loved Owen, had come to love his whole family, but there were moments when she stood in the bathroom at 2 a.m, attached to the pump while Emma slept, and her phone showed a text from Rachel asking if she had any extra milk for tomorrow, that she wanted to scream. It was Rachel who finally noticed. She came over one Saturday with Daniel and Owen for their weekly visit, and found Sarah sitting on the couch, still in her pajamas at noon, with unwashed pump parts on the coffee table, and Emma watching more television than Sarah normally allowed. "Sarah?" Rachel set Owen's carrier down and came to sit beside her. "What's wrong?" And somehow Sarah found herself crying. Great ugly sobs that she'd been holding back for weeks. "I can't do this anymore. I love Owen, I love your family, but I'm so tired. I'm barely keeping it together. Emma deserves a mother who has energy for her, and I'm running on empty. But I can't stop because Owen needs me, and I can't bear the thought of letting him down, of letting you down." Rachel took Sarah's hand, her own eyes filling with tears. Oh, Sarah, we've been so selfish. We've been so focused on Owen and so grateful for what you're doing that we haven't stopped to think about what it's costing you. You're not selfish, Sarah protested. You're parents trying to feed your baby. And you're a mother who's already given us more than anyone should have to give, Rachel said firmly. Daniel and I need to figure this out. We can't keep depending on you like this. It's not sustainable, and it's not fair to you or Emma. Daniel, who'd been quiet, spoke up. We've been avoiding the hard conversations because we were afraid. Afraid that if we pushed Owen to take formula, he'd end up back in the hospital. Afraid that we were bad parents if we couldn't give him what he wanted. But fear isn't a good enough reason to keep draining you dry. Over the next week, Rachel, Daniel, and Sarah worked with Owen's pediatrician and a feeding specialist to create a transition plan. They would gradually introduce formula mixed with Sarah's milk, slowly adjusting the ratio while monitoring Owen's response. Sarah would continue pumping, but on a reduced schedule that was sustainable for her and Emma. And most importantly, they acknowledged that Sarah's role needed to evolve from primary food source to something else: aunt figure, family friend, the woman who'd helped save Owen's life but who also had her own life to live. The transition was harder than anyone expected. Owen fought the formula at first, screaming and refusing bottles, losing a little weight that terrified Rachel. Sarah had to resist the urge to just give in, to go back to exclusively pumping for him, to sacrifice herself on the altar of his needs. But slowly, painfully, Owen began to adjust. The screaming sessions grew shorter. He started accepting bottles with a 70-30, mix of formula to Sarah's milk, then 60-40, then 50-50. On the day Owen took a bottle that was entirely formula, Rachel called Sarah in tears. He did it. He drank 4 ounces of straight formula. He's okay. He's going to be okay. Sarah cried too. But her tears were complicated, relief and pride and an unexpected grief. Owen didn't need her anymore, not in the same way. She was being set free, but freedom felt strangely like loss. She continued pumping for another month, building up a freezer stash for Rachel to use as needed, a security blanket for all of them. But gradually, her body got the message that the urgent demand had decreased. Her supply began to drop naturally, and she didn't fight it. Emma was eating solid foods primarily now, nursing only at bedtime out of comfort rather than hunger. The constant cycle of pumping and washing, parts and labeling bags finally came to an end. The first morning Sarah woke up without engorgement. Without the physical urgency to pump, she lay in bed and cried. Her body, which had been on loan to Owen for 8 months, finally belonged to her again. It was liberating and devastating in equal measure. But the story didn't end there either. Because Owen and his family had become part of Sarah's life in a way that transcended milk donation. The boys, because Sarah now thought of Owen and Emma as the boys, despite Emma being a girl, continued their playdates. Rachel and Sarah became genuine friends, sharing babysitting, duties, and adult conversations in the comfortable silence of mothers who understood each other's struggles. Daniel fixed things around Sarah's house and taught Emma how to use toy tools, insisting he owed Sarah more than he could ever repay. On Owen's first birthday, they had a joint party, a celebration of his survival and his homecoming and the village that had carried him through it. Sarah stood with Emma on her hip, watching Owen demolish a cake with Rachel and Daniel beaming beside him, and felt a completeness she'd never expected to find. Rachel came to stand beside her, following her gaze to their children. "I never believed in fate before," Rachel said quietly. "But then Owen was born too early, and my body failed to feed him, and somehow the universe brought us you. Sarah Mitchell, with the same last name, with a daughter who'd survived the same fight, with a body that could give what mine couldn't. How is that not fate?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I'm glad. Even the hard parts, I'm glad it was us. There's something I need to tell you," Rachel said, her voice taking on a nervous quality. "Daniel and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something important, but I need you to know you can say no. You've already given us so much." Sarah's heart began to race. "What is it?" "We want you to be Owen's godmother. Officially, we want Emma to be his sister in every way that matters. We want our families to be joined. Not just because of milk donation or shared trauma, but because we choose each other." "Is that crazy?" Sarah looked at Emma, then at Owen, then at Rachel's hopeful, anxious face. She thought about the night she'd first decided to donate milk, never imagining it would lead here. She thought about the freezer bags and the sleepless nights and the overwhelming exhaustion. She thought about how Owen had learned to eat without her milk, but had never learned to live without her love. It's not crazy, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. It's family. And yes, 1,000 times yes. They stood together, watching their children, bound by biology and choice, and the fierce love that mothers carry for the babies they feed, whether from their bodies or their hearts. Sarah had donated her milk to a stranger's son, and in return, she'd received something she hadn't known. She was missing proof that motherhood could expand beyond one child, that family could be chosen, that the hardest things could become the most precious things, if you were brave enough to let them. Emma and Owen would grow up knowing this story, knowing that their families had been stitched together by need and milk and love. They would know that sometimes mothers feed babies who aren't their own, that sometimes the body's wisdom connects strangers in inexplicable ways, that sometimes the things you give away are the things that complete you. And on the days when Sarah felt overwhelmed by the ordinary chaos of raising children, she would remember standing at the NICU window with her bags of frozen milk, choosing to say yes when she could have said no. She would remember that she had fed a stranger's son, and he had grown strong on her gift, and in feeding him, she had somehow fed her own soul to